I'm Jack, and before you go to see 28 Years Later, here's everything you need to know about the franchise that redefined zombie movies. The movie opens to animal rights activists breaking into a research lab to release chimpanzees being experimented on. A scientist warns the animals are infected with a virus called Rage. But hey ho, let's release them anyway and immediately find out that the scientist was probably correct. We then move on to Jim, a bicycle courier that has been in a coma. He wakes up alone in an empty London hospital 28 days after the first scene. Dressed in a hospital gown, he ventures out into the city. As he walks through central London across empty streets, littered landmarks and trashed storefronts, it becomes clear that something catastrophic has happened. Jim enters a church hoping to find some sort of life, however stumbles upon a pile of bodies.
Hello?
Two of the bodies in the pile jump up to life. This was Jim's first encounter with the infected. As Jim sprints away as fast as he can, he is almost caught, but saved at the last second by two survivors, Mark and Selena. After helping Jim escape, Mark and Selena explain everything that has happened over the last 28 days, and how things have got to this point. The three find their way to Jim's parents' house for some shelter, but also to get some clothes for Jim. While they are there, Jim finds his parents no longer alive together in bed. Later that night, a group of infected smashed through the windows and attacked the three. In all the chaos, Mark is bitten. Without hesitation, Selena ends his life before he had time to become one of the infected. Jim and Selena then decide it is no longer safe to stay where they are and must move now to find a safer place to stay. While on the search for a new spot, a block of flats in the distance have what look like Christmas lights flashing from a balcony. When they get to the block of flats, they meet Frank and his daughter Hannah, and they allow Jim and Selena to stay the night. The next morning, Frank tells them that he has found a radio transmission promising shelter and the answer to infection.
Salvation is here. The answer to infection is here.
They decide to join forces, hoping for strength in numbers. They set off towards Manchester despite the dangers of journeying that far. The group end up leaving London and heading towards the military blockade near Manchester in Frank's taxi. On the way, they decide to stop at a supermarket for some supplies. This ends up being one of the more enjoyable moments they've had since all of this started, even if Frank does look like a dad pushing a trolley round on the family shopping trip. After this, the group decide to get back on the road. A while later, Frank needed to refuel at a nearby petrol station. Jim ventures into a building alone and is confronted by an infected boy, and he is forced to do what he had to do. Until this point, others had to do the killing for him. A change occurred within Jim as he realised what it actually takes to survive in this world. Hours later, they stopped as it was getting dark and needed to find a place to camp for the night. They chose an open field next to what looked like a ruined castle or abbey of some sort. Frank spots some horses in the distance and points it out to the rest of the group. They gain some sense of normality from this and feeling that nature has regained control of the world. The group enjoys a nice meal and open up to each other for the rest of the night. The next morning, the group resume their journey and finally reach the military blockade to find it's ruined and abandoned. Frank is angered and upset when the help they were hoping for was not there. He looks up to a crow pecking at an infected body when a drop of blood falls down directly into his eye. Bad luck, Frank. As Frank starts to become one of the infected, an upsetting scene of Frank professing his love to Hannah, his daughter, ensues. Selena cries to Jim to finish him before it's too late. As Jim goes for a swing, shots are heard and Frank is laid lifeless on the floor. It turns out the soldiers were here all along, just hiding. The rest of the group are then brought to a fortified country house controlled by Major Henry West. Yes, the Ninth Doctor. At first, the place seems secure with food, electricity and protection, but something does feel off. Jim discovers that West has no cure or rescue plan. Instead, he intends on using Selena and Hannah as sex slaves to repopulate the world, promising his men women in exchange for their loyalty. Jim didn't like the sound of this and decided to fight back. However, this doesn't turn out very well as they try to execute Jim. Luckily, because he's a skinny little boy, he escapes the execution and returns under the cover of night and releases an infected soldier being held captive. After lots of death and a lot of kissing, the three flee the collapsing compound, narrowly escaping both the infected and the remaining soldiers. Jim is wounded, however, during the escape, but he does survive. Weeks later, Jim, Selena and Hannah are recovering in a remote cottage. They lay out a giant hello sign in the field A military drone flies overhead, suggesting that rescue and the return of some kind of civilization might finally be near. Now that's the first movie over and done with, let's move on to the second film. The movie begins in the countryside, weeks into the original rage virus outbreak. A small group of survivors is hiding in an isolated cottage. Among them are Don and Alice, a married couple clinging to hope. One night there's a knock at the door. A desperate child begs to be let in. Against their better judgment, they open the door, and that's all it takes. The infected end up swarming in, chaos erupts in the madness. Don sees Alice pulled away, screaming for him, and in that moment, he runs. He doesn't look back, he saves himself. This one act, this choice to abandon her, will come back to haunt everything that follows. 28 weeks later, the infected have died of starvation. The UK is a ghost country, but the US and NATO have moved in, declaring part of London safe again. They've set up a heavily guarded quarantine zone on the Isle of Dogs. They call this District 1. Don somehow made it here. He's rebuilding his life, preparing for the return of his two children, Tammy and Andy, who were safely abroad when the world fell apart. District 1 looks clean, organised, controlled. There's food, electricity, surveillance, and a new beginning. Don works as a maintenance worker in the facility and tries to settle back into a routine. When his kids arrive, he tells them their mother is dead. However, Andy doesn't seem to buy this. Breaking rules in a post-apocalyptic quarantine zone isn't smart, but kids will be kids. Tammy and Andy sneak out of the compound to go back to their old home. They want keepsakes, memories, family photos, but what they find is something far more shocking. Alice is alive, malnourished, bitten, but somehow not infected. Alice is brought back into quarantine and examined by military doctors. She's infected. Her blood is full of the rage virus, but she shows no symptoms. She's a carrier. This means she can spread the virus, but isn't consumed by it. To some, this makes her a biological miracle, but to some others, a biological weapon. Overwhelmed with guilt and hope, Don sneaks into Alice's isolation room. He apologizes, she forgives him, they kiss. But the virus doesn't forgive. In seconds, Don is infected and the rage takes hold. He murders Alice, then tears through the medical wing, spreading the virus to soldiers, civilians, and everyone. The second outbreak has begun. The infection rips through District 1 with terrifying speed. Surveillance fails, troops panic, civilians stampede. Much like every year on Black Friday, the chain of command breaks down and the US Army authorizes Code Red. Full-scale extermination. Snipers are ordered to shoot anything that moves, but when infected and uninfected are mixed together, hesitation turns to mass murder. Then come the napalm firebombs, dropped across the city to contain the spread, but it doesn't work. As chaos reigns, two people step up. Sergeant Doyle, a sniper who defies orders to protect the innocent, Hawkeye, and Major Scarlet, a medical officer who realizes that Andy might carry the same immunity as his mother. They risk everything to get Tammy and Andy to safety, believing the children may hold the cure. Doyle then steals a car and leads the group through the firebombed ruins of London. Military gas spreads through the streets, snipers shoot anyone still breathing. Eventually, Doyle dies a hero's death, incinerated while buying the others time to escape. Now it's just Scarlet, Tammy, and Andy. They're not alone. Somehow, Donnie's still out there. He kills Scarlet, then finds the kids. Cornered in the tunnels, Tammy does what Don couldn't do all those weeks ago. She stopped running, and she kills him. Tammy and Andy are extracted by helicopter. They've survived, but they may not have left the virus behind. The final shots ahead, a radio transmission.
We need your help.
An empty city, and then infected running through the Paris metro. The virus is no longer contained. Now you know everything there is to know about the two films. 28 years later comes out on the 19th of June. Like and subscribe for more videos like this, and I'll see you next week.